Welcome, dear viewers, to a heart-wrenching tale of redemption, unexpected connections, and the power of second chances. Enjoy the story. The buzzer of Diane Miller's modest apartment in downtown Chicago pierced the quiet afternoon air. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed to the intercom, her hand trembling as she pressed the button. "Hello?" she said, her voice wavering with anticipation. "Mom, it's me. I'm home." Diane's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected to hear that voice for another 6 months. Without hesitation, she buzzed him in and flung open the apartment door, her eyes fixed on the elevator at the end of the hallway. When the door slid open, revealing her son Jack, Diane couldn't contain herself. She ran towards him, tears streaming down her face. "Jack! Oh my God, Jack!" she cried, throwing her arms around him. "I can't believe it's you!" Jack embraced his mother tightly, burying his face in her shoulder. For a moment, they stood there in the hallway, holding each other as if afraid the other might disappear. Finally, Diane pulled back, cupping her son's face in her hands. "Look at you," she said, her eyes roaming over his features. "You've lost so much weight. Are you okay? Why didn't you tell me you were getting out early?" Jack managed a small smile. "I wanted to surprise you, Mom, and I'm fine, really. Just glad to be home." As they entered the apartment, Jack's eyes darted around, taking in the familiar surroundings. "Where's Amanda?" he asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Diane's face fell. She'd been dreading this moment. "Oh, honey," she said softly, guiding him to sit on the couch. "I'm so sorry. Amanda, she left, about 6 months after you went in." Jack's face hardened, but Diane could see the pain in his eyes. "I see," he said flatly. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Did she leave a message or anything?" Diane shook her head. "No, sweetie. She just packed up her things one day and was gone. I'm so sorry." Jack nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's okay, Mom. I kind of expected it. 3 years is a long time to wait for someone." Diane's heart broke for her son. She knew how much he had loved Amanda, how excited they had been to start their life together. And now, because of one tragic mistake, it had all fallen apart. "Why don't you go take a nice hot bath?" Diane suggested, desperate to do something, anything, to comfort her boy. "I just bought some of that pine-scented bubble bath you always liked. It'll help you relax." Jack managed a weak smile. "That sounds great, Mom. Thanks." As Jack disappeared into the bathroom, Diane sank onto the couch, her mind whirling. Her son was home, but at what cost? He'd lost 3 years of his life, his wife, and who knew what else. How could she help him rebuild? In the bathroom, Jack lowered himself into the steaming, fragrant water, closing his eyes as the warmth enveloped him. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to truly relax. But as he did, the memories he'd been holding at bay came flooding back. He saw Amanda's face, flushed with happiness as they celebrated their 3rd anniversary. He heard the music from the party, the laughter of their friends. And then, like a record scratching, the scene changed. Angry voices, a scuffle outside the bar, his fist connecting with a stranger's face, the sickening thud as the man hit the ground, the horrifying stillness that followed. Jack's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. It was over now. He'd served his time. But as the bubbles slowly dissipated around him, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his ordeal was far from over. The next morning, Diane woke early, determined to make Jack's favorite breakfast. As she rummaged through the refrigerator, she realized she was missing a few key ingredients. "I'll just run to the store real quick," she muttered to herself, grabbing her purse and keys. The local supermarket was just around the corner, a small mom-and-pop shop that had somehow survived the onslaught of big chain stores. As Diane picked up eggs and bacon, she overheard 2 women gossiping in the next aisle. "Did you hear? Mary's boy is back from prison," one woman whispered. "No, you don't mean Jack Miller, do you?" the other replied, her voice thick with scandal. "The very same. I saw him yesterday looking thin as a rail. Can you imagine? A killer living right here in our neighborhood?" Diane's hands clenched around the carton of eggs, her face burning with anger and shame. She wanted to confront them, to defend her son, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she hurried through checkout and left the store, her heart heavy. As she walked home, a small fruit stand caught her eye. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Patel, waved her over. "Mrs. Miller, I have some fresh apples today, Jack's favorite," he called out cheerfully. Diane managed a smile. At least someone in the neighborhood didn't treat them like pariahs. "Thank you, Mr. Patel. I'll take a dozen." As Mr. Patel bagged the apples, Diane felt a tug on her skirt. She looked down to see a young girl, no more than 7 or 8, with big brown eyes and a dirty face. "Excuse me, ma'am," the girl said timidly. "Would you like to buy a TV? I need money for my mom's medicine." Diane's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "Where are your parents?" "My mom's at home. She's sick," the girl replied. "My dad, he died a long time ago." Something about the girl's story tugged at Diane's memory, but she couldn't quite place it. "What's your name, honey?" "Sophie," the girl replied. "Sophie Bradshaw." Diane's blood ran cold. Bradshaw, the name of the man Jack had accidentally killed. Could it be? "Sophie," Diane said gently, "can you show me where you live? I'd like to help your mom if I can." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, it's not far." As they walked, Diane's mind raced. If this was indeed the daughter of the man Jack had killed, what did that mean? Was this some kind of cosmic joke, or a chance for redemption? Sophie led her to a rundown house on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The paint was peeling, and the front steps looked dangerously rotted. "Be careful on the steps," Sophie warned as they approached the house. "The third one's kind of wobbly." Diane's heart ached at the sight. No child should have to live like this. As they entered the small, dimly lit living room, Diane's eyes were immediately drawn to a photograph on the wall. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man in the picture, the same man whose face had haunted her son's nightmares for the past 3 years. "Sophie," Diane said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is that your dad?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Yeah, Mom says he was a good man, but I don't really remember him." Before Diane could respond, a weak voice called out from the next room. "Sophie, is that you?" "Yeah, Mom," Sophie called back. "I brought someone to help." As Diane followed Sophie into the bedroom, she felt as if she were walking in a dream. There, lying on a threadbare mattress, was a woman who couldn't have been much older than Jack. Her face was pale and drawn with illness, but Diane could see traces of beauty beneath the exhaustion. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice hoarse. Diane swallowed hard, her mind racing. How could she explain who she was, why she was here? In that moment, she made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "I'm Diane," she said simply, "and I'm here to help." Diane's hands shook as she dialed Jack's number. She'd left Sophie's house with promises to return with medicine and food, her mind whirling with the implications of what she'd discovered. "Mom?" Jack's voice came through the phone, tinged with concern. "Is everything okay?" "Jack, honey," Diane began, her voice trembling. "I need your help with something. It's complicated." She quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jack?" she prompted, her heart racing. "Are you there?" "I'm here, Mom," he replied, his voice tight with emotion. "I'll be right there. Just give me the address." As Diane waited on the corner for Jack to arrive, she couldn't help but wonder if she was doing the right thing. Was she opening old wounds, creating new ones? But as she thought of Sophie's big brown eyes and Rachel's fragile form, she knew she couldn't turn her back on them. Jack pulled up in his old pickup truck, his face a mask of apprehension. As he got out, Diane could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked, his voice low. "Maybe we should just call social services or something." Diane shook her head firmly. "No, Jack, we need to do this. It's the right thing to do." Jack nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "Okay, let's go." They made their way to the pharmacy first, where Jack efficiently gathered the medications listed on Rachel's prescription. Diane couldn't help but notice the care and attention he paid to each item, double-checking dosages and asking the pharmacist questions. Next, they hit the grocery store. Jack moved through the aisles with purpose, filling their cart with nutritious foods and household essentials. As he placed a box of Sophie's favorite cereal in the cart, Diane felt a surge of pride for her son. "You're doing a good thing, Jack," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Jack gave her a small smile, the first real one she'd seen since his return. "I hope so, Mom. I really hope so." As they approached Sophie's house, Jack's steps slowed. Diane could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You don't have to come in if you're not ready," she offered gently. Jack took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "No, I need to do this, for them and for me." They climbed the rickety steps carefully, arms laden with bags. As Diane knocked on the door, she sent up a silent prayer that this encounter would bring healing, not more pain. Sophie's face lit up when she saw them. "You came back!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Diane's waist. As Sophie's gaze shifted to Jack, her eyes widened slightly. There was a moment of recognition, a flicker of something Diane couldn't quite name, but it passed quickly. "Hi," Sophie said shyly. "I'm Sophie." Jack knelt down to her level, his voice gentle. "Hi, Sophie. I'm Jack. I'm here to help you and your mom, okay?" Sophie nodded, then turned and led them into the house. As they entered Rachel's room, Diane could see the surprise and confusion on the sick woman's face. "Mrs. Miller?" Rachel said, her voice weak. "What's going on? Who is this?" Diane took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Rachel, this is my son Jack. We're here to help you and Sophie. Please, just let us do this for you." Rachel's eyes darted between Diane and Jack, realization slowly dawning on her face. For a moment, Diane feared she would reject their help, send them away. But then Rachel's shoulders sagged, and she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." As Jack and Diane set about organizing the medications and preparing a meal, Sophie bounced around excitedly, peppering them with questions. Rachel watched from her bed, her expression a mix of gratitude and wariness. Diane couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. As she watched Jack patiently explain to Sophie how to properly take her mother's temperature, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of healing for all of them. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Diane fell into a routine of visiting Rachel and Sophie daily. Jack threw himself into repairing the dilapidated house, fixing the dangerous front steps, patching the leaky roof, and even repainting the exterior. One afternoon, as Jack worked on replacing a broken window, Rachel approached him hesitantly. She had been growing stronger each day, thanks to the proper medication and nutrition. "Jack," she said softly, causing him to turn. "Can we talk?" Jack nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I know who you are. What happened with my husband?" Jack's face paled, but he didn't look away. "Rachel, She held up a hand, stopping him. "Please let me finish. I was so angry for so long. I blamed you for everything that went wrong in our lives, but seeing you here, how you've been with Sophie, how you and your mother have helped us, I think I'm finally ready to let go of that anger." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. "Rachel, I am so, so sorry. Not a day goes by that I don't regret what happened. If I could trade places with him, I would in a heartbeat." Rachel shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "I know you would, but that's not how life works. We can't change the past, but maybe we can build a better future." As they talked, sharing stories of grief, regret, and hope, a weight seemed to lift from both of them. When Sophie came bounding up, asking Jack to push her on the newly repaired swing set, Rachel's laughter joined his. From the kitchen window, Diane watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and bittersweet understanding. They were all broken in their own ways, but together, they were beginning to heal. 6 months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, home improvements, and slowly blossoming relationships. Rachel's health improved dramatically, and she was even able to start working part-time from home as a virtual assistant. One sunny Saturday morning, As they all sat around the breakfast table, a routine that had developed naturally over time, Rachel cleared her throat nervously. "I have some news," she announced, causing everyone to look up from their plates. "I got a call yesterday. The government housing application I submitted months ago. It's been approved. We've been offered a 3-bedroom apartment in a nice part of town." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Sophie let out a squeal of excitement. "We're moving? To a real apartment?" Rachel nodded, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. But as her eyes met Jack's, her smile faltered slightly. "It's a great opportunity for us, but—" Jack reached across the table, taking her hand. "But nothing. This is amazing news, Rachel. You and Sophie deserve this." Diane watched the exchange, her heart aching. She knew how close they had all become, how much Jack cared for Rachel and Sophie. The thought of them leaving was bittersweet. "When do you move?" Diane asked, trying to keep her voice light. "That's the thing," Rachel replied, biting her lip. "They want us to move in as soon as possible. Like, next week?" The news hit like a bombshell. Jack stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing air, and rushed out of the house. Rachel made to follow him, but Diane stopped her. "Let me," she said softly, squeezing Rachel's shoulder as she passed. Diane found Jack sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him, not speaking, just offering her presence. "I don't want them to go, Mom," Jack finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it's selfish, but I love them, both of them." Diane wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders. "I know, honey, and that's why you have to let them go. This is a chance for them to have a better life." Jack nodded, wiping his eyes. "You're right. Of course, you're right. I don't know what I'll do without them." Diane smiled, a plan already forming in her mind. "Well, maybe you don't have to be without them. Jack, honey, have you considered that maybe this is an opportunity for all of you?" Jack looked at his mother, confusion evident on his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Diane said gently, "that maybe it's time for you to take the next step. You love Rachel and Sophie, don't you?" Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "More than I ever thought possible." "Then tell them," Diane urged. "Ask Rachel to marry you. Make a life with them in that new apartment. It's a fresh start for all of you." Jack's eyes widened as he considered his mother's words. "But do you think she'd say yes? After everything that's happened?" Diane squeezed her son's hand. "Jack, I've seen the way Rachel looks at you, the way Sophie adores you. You've all been through so much, but you've come out stronger together. I think you owe it to yourselves to try." With newfound determination, Jack stood up. "You're right, Mom. I need to talk to Rachel." As Jack rushed back into the house, Diane smiled to herself. Her son had been given a second chance at happiness, and she was determined to see him grab it with both hands. Jack found Rachel in the kitchen, washing dishes with a faraway look in her eyes. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. "Rachel," he said softly, causing her to turn. "Can we talk?" She nodded, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Jack took her hands in his, leading her to the living room couch. As they sat down, he could feel his heart racing. "Rachel, these past 6 months have been, well, they've been the best of my life," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know we came together under the most unlikely circumstances, but I can't imagine my life without you and Sophie now." Rachel's eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear flickering across her face. "Jack, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I love you, Rachel, both of you, and I don't want to lose you. I know this new apartment is an amazing opportunity, but I was hoping you might consider letting me be a part of it." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Jack nodded, a nervous smile playing on his lips. "Rachel Bradshaw, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Sophie, a husband to you? Will you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life making you both happy?" Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she threw her arms around Jack's neck. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Their lips met in a kiss filled with promise and hope for the future. As they broke apart, both laughing and crying. They heard a small gasp from the doorway. Sophie stood there, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are you going to be my new dad?" she asked Jack, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack knelt down, opening his arms to the little girl. "If you'll have me, kiddo, what do you say?" Sophie launched herself into Jack's arms, nearly knocking him over. "Yes, yes, yes!" As the newly formed family hugged and laughed, Diane watched from the kitchen, her heart full. This was more than she could have ever hoped for when she first encountered Sophie that day at the fruit stand. It was a miracle, a second chance at happiness for all of them. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Between packing for the move and planning an impromptu wedding, there was hardly a moment to breathe. But through it all, there was an undercurrent of joy and excitement that buoyed everyone's spirits. On moving day, friends and neighbors gathered to help load the truck. Even Mr. Patel from the fruit stand showed up with boxes of fresh produce for the new home. As Jack carried the last box out of the old house, he paused in the doorway, looking back at the place where so much had changed. "You okay?" Rachel asked, coming up beside him and slipping her hand into his. Jack nodded, smiling down at her. "Just thinking about how different everything was when I first came here. How different I was." Rachel squeezed his hand. "We've all changed. For the better, I think." As they drove to their new apartment, Sophie chatted excitedly from the back seat about her new room and the park she'd seen nearby. Jack and Rachel exchanged smiles, both marveling at how quickly their little girl had bounced back from the hardships of the past few years. When they arrived at the apartment building, Jack insisted on carrying Rachel over the threshold, much to Sophie's delight and Diane's amusement. As they entered their new home, sunlight streaming through the windows and the sounds of Sophie's laughter filling the air, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. That evening, as they all sat on the floor eating pizza among the boxes, Diane raised her soda can in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "To family," Jack added, pulling Rachel and Sophie close. As they clinked their cans together, a scratching sound came from one of the boxes. Sophie's eyes lit up as she remembered their newest family member, the stray kitten she'd insisted on bringing along. "Can I let Mittens out now?" she asked eagerly. Rachel laughed, nodding her assent. As Sophie opened the box, releasing a tiny gray ball of fur into their new home, Jack couldn't help but feel that everything had fallen into place exactly as it was meant to. 1 year later. The small church was packed with friends, family, and neighbors. Jack stood at the altar, his heart pounding with nervous excitement. As the wedding march began to play, all heads turned to watch Sophie walk down the aisle, scattering rose petals and beaming with pride in her flower girl dress. And then, there she was, Rachel, radiant in a simple white gown, her eyes locked on Jack's as she made her way towards him. As she reached his side, Jack took her hand, marveling at how far they had come. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Jack took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke from the heart. "Rachel, when we first met, it was under the most impossible circumstances. I never could have imagined that the greatest tragedy of my life would lead me to my greatest joy. You and Sophie have taught me the true meaning of forgiveness, of love, and of family. I promise to spend every day of our lives together, showing you both how grateful I am for this second chance." There wasn't a dry eye in the house as Rachel and Jack sealed their vows with a kiss. As they turned to face their guests, Sophie rushed forward to join their embrace, the three of them now officially a family in the eyes of the law and their community. At the reception, Diane watched her son dance with his new wife, her heart overflowing with happiness. Mr. Patel sidled up to her, offering her a glass of champagne. "Who would have thought," he said, nodding towards the happy couple, "that selling a little girl some apples would lead to all this?" Diane smiled, raising her glass. "I guess sometimes life has a way of bringing people together, even in the most unexpected ways." As the night wore on, Jack found a moment alone with his mother. He pulled her into a tight hug, whispering, "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for believing in me, for giving me the courage to reach out to Rachel and Sophie. I wouldn't be here without you." Diane cupped her son's face in her hands, her eyes shining with pride and love. "Oh, Jack, you did all the hard work yourself. I'm just so proud of the man you've become, of the family you've built." As they rejoined the party, Jack looked around at the faces of his loved ones. Rachel, laughing as she twirled Sophie on the dance floor. Diane, deep in conversation with some of the neighbors who had become like family over the past year. Even Amanda was there, having made peace with Jack and offering her genuine congratulations. In that moment, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at life itself, and he was determined to make the most of every single day. As the night drew to a close, Jack, Rachel, and Sophie stood on the steps of the church, waving goodbye to their guests. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. And as they drove off into the night, tin cans clattering behind their car and "Just Married" scrawled on the back window, Jack knew that this was more than just a happy ending. It was a new beginning, a chance to write a beautiful new chapter in their shared story.